All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Munro Live podcast. I'm Scott Hoffman, and today I have the distinct pleasure of hosting Mr. Ben Schaffer, who I believe is credited as the first person to bring a Tesla to the SEMA show, which makes you like a true founding father of EV tuner culture. I think that's an inaccurate statement, right?
That's an odd fact, but yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, right, founder and president of Unplugged Performance, which specializes in some of that area. But either way, Ben, really excited to chat with you today. Thank you for making the time, sir. How are you?
Yeah, it's an honor. I'm a big fan of Munro and what you guys are doing, and it's always fun to talk to like-minded people who have the same passion that we have for stuff. So, looking forward to today's conversation. Things are great. Just got back in town from our first Tesla Corsa event on the East Coast in Atlanta, so I'm a little sunburned. But back in LA, I appreciate the weather in LA more than ever after being in Atlanta. It was tough out there.
Absolutely. How were conditions at the track? Did you get some decent weather?
Beautiful, just very hot, but dry, which is good. So we had a fun time. Our race driver Randy Popes, that's his hometown track, so we gave him the fast car, and I think we got a new lap record. It seems like out there. So yeah, it was a good time. Everyone had a good time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have some questions about Randy that we'll bring up here in a little bit, but
Sure,
super
Randy's the best.
fascinated to hear more about the racing as well. I know before I knew we were talking in long, I think before we even had this channel, I've watched Unplugged videos for years, specifically the Pikes Peak hill climb. I used to live out in Colorado. I've made that
Oh,
drive and
cool.
I've seen that in car footage, and it
Yeah,
terrifies me to my core. Randy is a brave
yeah,
fella, I'll
yeah.
say that.
Terrifies me too after 4 years out there. I've seen more than I wanted to see of it, and that's a scary drive even at 20 miles an
Yeah,
hour. Never
yeah. That
mind
I
the
mean, that's the
140.
more to come on that. Good stuff. But awesome. Okay, so Ben, for those that are tuning in that may be unfamiliar with you or more specifically with Unplugged Performance, I was wondering perhaps you could just kind of level set, explain what is Unplugged Performance, how did you guys get started, and what do you guys do
Yeah.
basically?
I mean, we're car enthusiasts first and foremost. This is my 23rd year in the aftermarket, and 10 years now with Unplugged.
Hmm.
And we had the, I'd say, luck or good fortune of finding ourselves as business partners with Tesla's design studio with Franz and his team. Prior to that, we specialized in Japanese car tuning, and our background goes back. The first year in the business, I was involved in the first Fast and Furious movie, and then we were early stages of kind of time attack racing culture, a little bit of drift culture, and Japanese car tuning culture. And we met a handful of like-minded car people at Tesla's design studio because of our crazy cars we'd have ripping up and down the street for testing purposes. So our background was Nissan GTRs primarily, and in 2013, got a knock on the door from our neighbors, had some friendly conversations about what we thought about their work. I was thankfully already a shareholder in Tesla from 2012, but I hadn't thought about it in terms of our aftermarket work until having a conversation with them, and that changed my life. And I would say, not to be too philosophical, but it really gave meaning to my work, because before that, it was just about making things that went fast and looked cool.
Hmm.
But to have some actual real purpose attached to it, as far as the environment and as far as advocating for something that wasn't just cool, but something that was meaningful, it makes events like Pikes Peak and a lot of the things that are really challenging mentally, challenging financially, and don't make a lot of business sense. Those things make more sense in the context of shaping public perception around how fun it can be to drive an EV. And that became really a lot of the mission that we have. And we still hold true to that 10 years later with Unplugged.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I've heard a bit about this origin story, and to me, yeah, just I don't, how much of it was coincidence or the universe coming together. So just to clarify, so you had a company, Bulletproof Automotive, that specialized in Japanese tuning parts that were, so you guys were essentially repping brands and
Yeah.
bringing stuff from other companies over, and that was set up what in Hawthorne, right? That was where you
Yeah.
guys were.
So, yeah, actually, I ended up moving to California because I was an extra on the Fast and the Furious first movie in
Okay.
2000 while I was in college. And I decided to relocate to LA because I met people in the industry who were doing what I thought was just like a hobby. They were doing it for real, like as a career. So I moved to LA and was like very deep in that world for a long time. And then, yeah, sort of transitioned from being a distributor. I'd be in Japan a lot, finding the latest and greatest manufacturers of really high end carbon fiber parts and aerodynamic parts and brakes and all the things we do now.
Sure.
I just was back then focused on finding those great things and sourcing them and bridging that divide of language and culture and shipping. And this is pre-smartphone, pre all this
Yeah.
stuff. And over time, as with anything, the deeper you get into it, the more creative freedom you want.
Sure.
And I kind of went from someone who would choose the brands and buy the products and distribute the products to someone who was advising these brands of what products to make because we knew the market. And then over time, it kind of became a scenario where it's their brand, it's not ours. I can't spend their money for them.
Sure.
So sometimes they listen to me and sometimes they would think I'm crazy. And over time, we wanted to have more involvement. So we started getting involved building show cars for trade shows like SEMA.
Okay.
For a number of years, I think from 2007 onward, we were a featured builder for some tire brands like Toyo and others. And then we started building our own brands of parts for Japanese cars, kind of dabbling in that, and gradually made the transition from distributor and custom car builder to manufacturer. And that was not because it was fun. It's actually really hard to manufacture.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not a trivial jump to make.
It's super hard now in hindsight, and maybe I was more confident year one, but I learned a lot of painful lessons along the way.
Sure.
But the bottom line was when we decided that EVs were the future, and we decided that car culture needs to survive in the EV era. And by the way, this is a given now, but in 2013, the theory was if you bought an EV, you weren't a car person, and also you couldn't modify it. And also it was like the death of all things fun for car people. Like that's like what they thought it was.
Yeah.
Because they were just coming out of like the Prius era, and like it was just like this responsible but not like core enthusiast thing. And we really needed to advocate for that because we knew that wasn't true. And of course, with the background of a distributor, if there's no products that exist to distribute, you got to make your own. And that's kind of where we started as a manufacturer. And then fast forward, we have to have the right, expertise and design, engineering, and supply chain to cover the full spectrum of whatever you can do to a Tesla, from wheels to brakes to suspension to aerodynamics to carbon fiber parts, interiors, you name it.
Yeah, I thought it was really neat too. I think I read something where you had noted that really you guys have kind of, I think at least one new area within tuning parts that you're responsible for, CFD developed aero parts, which, historically people would use those to like get downforce and, make sure they could hook up on the track. But now, you think about something that people suddenly care about. Range never mattered in it to, ICE tuners, right? And it's this whole new era where, like you said, it didn't exist and you guys had to create these things that people were going to be interested in. That is, to me, I don't know, it's just phenomenally, it's a fundamentally different thing to like rep brands versus like to make the content to pick what's going to be interesting, especially in a new space where, there's not a precedent. So kudos to you for taking that leap. That is,
thank you.
And just so neat. So you were doing your thing with Bulletproof next door to Tesla. They got interested. They stopped by with one of their cars. And, it's interesting when you note, like, I remember when we were first starting to tear down EVs and we tore down our first Tesla. I think the first one I personally was involved with some of the teardown on was a Model X. And it was maybe 2015, 2016. And I remember reviewing it with a client and having this sort of conversation around like, when you look at the suspension choices, you look at like the materials, you look at the performance, what the vehicle can do. It's like, okay, from a dynamics perspective and the choices that they're making, this vehicle is more like a BMW or a Mercedes than it is to like an economy car. And it, for EVs or hybrids or whatever that, some of those, if they had the, the Prius mantra of being super conscious and also low cost, but I think in my perception, way back when it was like, okay, now we're seeing EVs that are like, could really arguably be called a driver's car, right? Or a fun car to drive. I guess, obviously, and then that starts to glove with where you guys play. But I guess from your perspective, how important or influential was the fact that Teslas were like fun and cool cars to drive? What did that like do to accelerate? I guess just this adoption, and it made it a natural fit for you, it would seem. But I guess that to me, it seemed like the first cool EV that was like you could argue it was a driver's car. I mean, was that your perception back in 2012, 2013 when you were kind of getting this off the ground?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're good at, and it's not a magical skill, but we really are our own customer. Like we know what we want and we don't need focus groups to know what needs to be done. Like, we know what we're after,
Sure.
and that's made us fairly fearless in how we place our bets. And sometimes those bets are very risky. For example, starting a manufacturing brand where there's no customer and no market is not a great business idea unless you're really committed to it long term. And in 2013, we were making parts, and no one thought that was a good idea besides us. But over time, I think it makes sense. We're in the same scenario now where we're engineering for Cybertruck and going into different categories there. Mm-hmm. We're engineering for police vehicles, going in different categories there. And I think the nature of the aftermarket at its highest level, and we're still aftermarket by general grouping. We're a little bit more specialized in some ways, but I think the nature of a third party, not a company like Tesla, is to take the ethos of what they're doing and to execute on things that are just slightly adjacent to what is economically viable or scales or is the core market. Sure. And that opportunity exists for every car, not just Tesla. Tesla happens to, I think, be a perfect match for us because they're so focused on efficiency and scale that the differentiation on a per model basis continues to become less and less. You used to have more paint options and more interior options, and now it's the latest car has no paint. So they really dialed it down.
They're like doing the opposite of Henry Ford. They're going back to the Model T from.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's great. I mean, it's great for us, and I think it's great for Tesla because obviously it's inefficient to have so many options as a manufacturer, but it doesn't mean that there aren't so many use cases. There are. It doesn't mean that there aren't so many customer profiles. There are. And I think our point of view is strictly to be additive to the experience and to tell these stories that aren't being told, whether it's motorsports or whether it's police or other things. There are all these use cases where Tesla as an engineering platform excels. And there will be more and more as time goes on with Cybertruck and future models. So yeah, you gave an example of utilizing CFD for efficiency. Mm-hmm. This is, to me, common sense. Just no one had done it before. It's the same process. You're just changing the target from downforce to less drag ultimately. And the beauty of the aftermarket is we get to cheat because the car manufacturers have homologation rules where they have to have things that they're worried about, like loading onto ferries and angles for the front bumper, which create lift.
Sure. And
the aftermarket, we don't care. We want to make the car that makes our customer happy. And thankfully, US laws allow us to do things that don't have to go through all these pedestrian safety standards and all the things. Now, Germany with TUV is a different story, but we get to have a lot of creativity. And that's super fun. We've never really defined it as we're a motorsports company or we're a street car company. Obviously, with the police stuff we're doing now and off-road related stuff, military stuff we're working on with Cybertruck and everything in between, we just look at it as Tesla has the best engineering in the world. What can we do differently that is just a little bit out of scope or focus for them, or we can showcase this in a new light? And I think the aftermarket has a lot of freedom in that, which is great.
No, it's fascinating. And, it's been interesting to see, right? Because with what we do, we end up working with a lot of different clients that some are established legacy brands, some are startups. And, naturally in the space, everyone's kind of curious what Tesla's doing, what strategies they're using, how are they advantageous or not. And, that has been one thing, sort of that more Spartan design theme, whether it's interior or exterior. There's not a whole lot of bling or flair on a lot of Teslas. And it's been interesting because we've seen and talked to clients about that and what that means for them in terms of savings and scale and simplicity, limiting complexity, limiting the number of variants, limiting the number of BOM items and things that you have to sequence and rack. And all of that has a cost associated with it. It's fascinating that, I hope some of them listen to this from the standpoint that it's been neat to see that for those who would gripe about maybe that there aren't enough options with a Tesla, in the free market, things find a way, right? So Unplugged Performance has come in to sort of augment what could be perceived as a negative, but maybe it's just Tesla saying, hey, we're going to be efficient at making sort of this canvas with the engineering architecture and really focus on that and getting that right, and then allowing companies in the aftermarket, such as yours, to come in and fill what could be perceived as that unmet need. That's I wonder if are you going to spin out companies to support that for other platforms? Maybe other companies should be looking at this and building their business plans around it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some respect this is always at its best, this is an ideal relationship between the aftermarket and the community and car manufacturers. In the case of the downside risk, though, is that the aftermarket doesn't have any standards. There's
Sure.
great things and there's terrible things.
Sure.
And there's no gatekeeper as to allowing someone to make something terrible that's unsafe versus encouraging someone to make something that represents the DNA, the engineering, and the brand the way it's supposed to. Sure. And I think this was a big responsibility. And unfortunately, because there's zero standards, you get the benefits of creativity and the downside of consumer risk, safety risk, and brand risk for Tesla. Yeah. So it's not all one direction or the other. There's some nuance to it. And ultimately, our point of view is we really want to operate at a level that Tesla's operating at, not at an aftermarket level. So the types of things that we do as far as, engineering, validation, product design, and just like purpose is important. You mentioned flair and bling. There is a use case for that in the aftermarket, but our point of view is whatever we're doing should add to the functionality and use case of the vehicle and not just be a hey, look at me kind of product.
Sure.
What you ultimately have crossover. The bottom line is like, when you look at a motorsports prep car, those things create downforce, but they also look cool. So whenever you have an intersection of function and badassery, we want to be at that intersection.
Yeah.
But it's got to have function. That's our ethos.
And forgive me too, because I didn't mean that to trivial. I think it's really, really distinguishing and unique and cool that you guys are focused on performance more so than style. That is I guess when you talk tuning, there are certainly style mods that people do that are only aesthetic, but from what I can tell, that is not really what you guys are after, and it really is all about performance and function. I guess hence why it's Unplugged Performance and not Unplugged Style. But
it's in the name, yeah.
I think you described it as what? It was like taking the car and making it an 11 out of 10, making it better at the things that maybe they couldn't do for practicality reasons. That's a pretty cool mission.
I think our mission, and what I would encourage everyone in the aftermarket to do whenever possible, is to really deeply understand the DNA of what you're modifying and to make it more of that, to make it a more pure expression of what it is. Sometimes the aftermarket, in my opinion, at its worst, changes something and goes against the intention of the car to try to satisfy a trend or a style.
Sure.
Our point of view is like really to try to get our brains in the mental space of Tesla's design and engineering team. What were they originally conceptualizing? What do they really want it to be? And then every manufacturer has constraints, whether it's cost constraints, material constraints, scale constraints, whatever it is. Those are the things that we can, in some cases, lift. And it's not that we're smarter than them. We're frequently not as smart as them. But we're able to do things at a different scale, different price point. So we have a different playbook, which in some cases we think makes our end product more exciting and better for certain fringe use cases, just because we don't have to solve our products times a million units.
Sure.
So we have a lot more freedom ultimately.
Sure. And this question, and if you can't speak in detail about this, totally fine. But I was curious, obviously you're on Tesla's radar, right? It seems as though there's a healthy relationship. I remember listening to like a Joe Rogan podcast and hearing Joe bring up your stuff with Elon. I mean, how was that for you, hearing them talk about your guys' stuff? That had to be pretty neat.
Made me pretty uncomfortable. I was not expecting that. Joe, for whatever reason, thankfully loves us. And he brought us up a handful of times to different guests and likes to go through our website. And every time he does it, I'm grateful, but also a little bit uncomfortable because he puts his guests on the spot to give a reaction.
Sure.
And Tesla in particular, for anyone who knows them well, is, their messaging and their communication style is very specific. So you never know how those things go.
Sure. Are you guys able, I guess that relationship though, if it exists, I was curious, because of the neat things you guys are doing, I was curious, do you guys maintain like correspondence to the extent that there's like sharing of information or models, to where obviously if you guys are doing fluid dynamics, it would be really helpful to have a model of the car or some of the components. Are you guys having to scan all that in yourself and set up your own models, or is there some sort of healthy relationship there where they're because they know what you're doing and because you're, I guess, taking more forethought than some people might, that there's a willingness to share there? I don't know. Is that something? Does that exist, or can that be talked about at all?
Yeah, I can't really speak on Tesla's behalf. All I can say is we're pretty self-sufficient on our own,
Got it.
so we're
Okay.
not dependent on anyone to do anything for us.
Got it. Okay. Fair enough. So yeah, and it's fascinating too. I guess just circling back to, you went in terms of the businesses, and I believe so. Bulletproof Automotive still exists, right? That's still I can
Yeah,
still go
it
and
consumes thankfully like 0.001% of my
okay,
time, but there's a little bit of just legacy of my life there that I have not fully separated. But yeah, we have a very good team outside of our core office, so there's not really any cross pollination internally.
got it.
But yeah, 23 years strong, still going. And as an enthusiast and hobbyist, I'm not one of these extremes that's like has to be this or has to be that. I think car culture should exist in various forms, but I also 1,000,000% advocate for the fun factor, usability, cost of ownership, all the benefits of driving an EV and driving a Tesla. And
Yeah,
to my point, I have a number of cars previously that I've kind of accumulated over my career that I've been gradually selling because I don't drive them. I'm
sure.
like, I love driving my Tesla so much that in LA on the 405, like, I'd be hard pressed to pick a day where I'd want to be in anything besides a Tesla with full self driving. It's just so convenient. So uh, it feels in some ways like a past chapter of my life, but in other ways, the business continues on, and I'm grateful that it does.
Sure, sure. And if you ever brought the two together, is there? I know you've talked about not wanting to sort of interfere with the spirit of the vehicle as it's intended. Is there any tuner car platform JDM stuff that you've previously supported or loved that you think would be a candidate to like powertrain swap or put Tesla bits in? Has that ever crossed your mind?
I'm a purist. Like
Okay,
I want the best outcome for the vehicle. I don't need to play by the same rule book and say it was intended to be this, but it needs to make sense.
sure.
I think, for practicality purposes, the original Roadster was good for what it needed to be, but as a car purist, in some days I think, oh, the Lotus was better because the ethos of the car was lightweight
Sure.
and Tesla made it heavy, but that was just a compromise that had to be made at the time. I'm very much a purist of like, what's the best outcome for the platform? And I think if you have a lightweight car, you should make it lighter. I think if you have whatever it is, it should be more of that. Obviously, there's business constraints around things, and the Roadster is iconic, and I certainly wouldn't ever disparage it. It needed to happen that way. But in a perfect world, that would have been a ground up platform designed for it rather than a retrofit of an existing platform.
Sure.
So when you talk about like Frankenstein in cars, I come from a background, where motor swaps are a common occurrence.
Sure.
So I think it's great. People EV swap previous cars. I think it's great for the environment. In almost every case, they're much faster. It's not really a focus of ours, so to say. In terms of use cases, I was going to do one as a personal project. I bought a 78 Lotus S1 Esprit
Oh wow. Okay.
that I thought was a good candidate. I think the best candidates for those are cars that are beautiful cars with terrible engines. And the S1 Esprit, I think, is a beautiful car, and the engine isn't that noteworthy. So to me, that was a candidate that at some point I wanted to do, and then I kind of just got too busy, so it's just sitting, rotting away.
Okay.
But I like that car. I mean, it was the Bond car. I think there's also some
Yeah.
Tesla connection to it.
I was
In a
gonna
loose
say
way.
there's a
So
full circle
yeah,
element there. I believe the Cybertruck has
yeah,
some inspiration from the Esprit, right?
a lot of things of inspiration from that. So you ask like, what's a good candidate car? I think the S1 Esprit is a
Okay.
pretty badass candidate car, but it's not our business. A lot of companies do a really good job at that.
Sure.
What will
Sure.
be really cool though is eventually when there's controllers out for the plaid drivetrain, because that
Yeah.
kind of plaid power retrofitted into every kind of car, you're going to see a lot of fun stuff come
Some
out
silly
whenever that
builds. Yeah.
happens. Yeah, that'll be
Yeah.
cool to see.
It's funny too, because yeah, and I realize, yeah, like tuning is different than like hot rodding and swapping engines and getting into that whole like because I've dabbled a little bit too, and yeah, like when you start taking an engine from one car and putting it into another, like you're usually condemning this vehicle to be a project car forever and losing all your creature comforts. It becomes just like, yep, it can
Pretty cool.
drive and it
Yeah,
can
yeah.
stop, but it's not like something, at least when I've been involved with it, that you can like comfortably daily drive. So it's got to be a hobby or it's just not going to make sense. I'm
Well,
with you there.
this is the nature of just my evolution in the industry. Is I think when I was younger, my mentality was a bit more like sledgehammer, like I don't care about the downsides. I'm just going to do crazy stuff. And after some decades, I've kind of realized that there are creative solutions where you can get the upside benefit you want and not lose the functionality. And these are things that I think, separate approach on the aftermarket. And our goal is to think more deeply like a car manufacturer and less like aftermarket. So when we, for example, this is not our super interesting example, but for our Model 3 front lip spoiler, our design objective was to reduce lift, create downforce, and not reduce ground clearance. And usually you have competing interests with adding downforce, also making it more efficient on the road, and also not reducing ground clearance from entry angle, and also making it out of urethane, so it has a little bit of give, so it won't just shatter on impact. So these are all things that we thought about for one product, just because we wanted it to be usable in every use case. And traditionally, the way the aftermarket works is you do one thing and makes it better, and that also makes something else worse. And whenever we can reach an outcome where it does everything better, those are pretty magical places to be. So
the win-win-win scenario. Some would say those are like unicorn situations. If you can find them, that's awesome. Very
More
cool.
often than not, they're there. It's just level of patience of trying to solve for it. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's fascinating. And I'm curious, I keep going back to like that transition from being a distributor to like making these things. I mean, obviously you're a really smart guy. You're talking about the considerations that you have to make some of these parts, but having worked with OEMs who are designing all the different systems and parts on a vehicle, like that takes an army of people and of expertise. What was that like as you were getting started? I guess like what size and type of a team and disciplines did you have to bring in to start having the chops essentially to not just design these, but validate them and then, tool, manufacture? I'm just super fascinated to hear that about that transition and how you built that team.
A lot of stupidity. I think if we were smart, we wouldn't have done it.
Okay.
I think we throw ourselves into dumb spots because we just want to see what we can do.
Sure.
And usually somehow we find our way out of them and survive it. But it was not a smart idea to have that level of confidence. But I also we don't really have a mentality of giving up. If you saw our example of when we totaled our Pikes Peak car, rebuilt it, and got up to the top of the mountain 2 days later, this is kind of our ethos of we just don't know when to quit, so we just keep smashing our head into the wall till we break through the wall. It's kind of we end up a little bloodied, but we get through it.
Sure.
So this is kind of in our DNA. It's not a choice; it's just how we're wired. When we started initially, we couldn't have started with every category that we're in now in terms of product manufacturing. We specialized in the beginning on a couple of things. We had a wheel partner in BBS, and our focus was to manufacture in-house composites. So our background with Japanese car tuning, we did a lot of suspension, and brakes, but one of the things we were very good at was carbon fiber work, and we had the know-how to make it ourselves. So when we started, my brilliant plan, which ended up almost destroying the company, was to do everything ourselves in Hawthorne, in LA. Okay. So we hired one guy from aerospace from Seattle. He's working at Boeing. We hired another guy from Italy who was with Ferrari's Formula One team.
Wow. And
then we started from scratch, hand shaping parts, doing our own tooling and doing our own composites with vacuum infusion in our warehouse. And then we had a little makeshift paint booth, and we're doing clear coating, and we basically made a bunch of parts for the Model S. That was the only car at the time to really work on. So we had, in the beginning, a front diffuser, side skirt rear diffuser, and trunk spoiler that were, a whole ecosystem made by hand in the back of our shop.
Yeah.
And we built that team to about 10 guys or so in terms of composites. And by the way, the entire origin of the business was that it was all self-funded from Bulletproof. So whatever Japanese car tuning stuff we did, every dollar went into
so you were all in, leveraging it for.
So we were all in. Unfortunately, that didn't work out well for my Tesla stock because I had to stop paying myself a salary for about 3 years. So as Tesla stock went up, I gradually would sell some off to keep living because I couldn't get a paycheck out of the business. But this was just 100% all in bet on the future of Tesla and EVs. But anyway, I learned along the way that manufacturing carbon fiber is attainable to be beautiful in-house, but is not attainable to be efficient and profitable in-house. And the efficiency of scaling it, we reached a point where we realized our logic was just flawed. I kind of encountered a scenario where if we had our best case dreams and had, an order of 1,000 units. How could we make it? And the answer was we could never make it. There was just not enough space in Hawthorne at the right labor price point to make it without losing money every single product and having it take us years. And I realized I was a total idiot. So, these lessons get learned. Thankfully, we have amazing partners. Koenigsegg, that makes these fantastic hypercars, is one of the factories that we use for carbon fiber. We're very proud of that because their factory only makes parts for their hypercars and for us. So we become very good at, I guess, attracting like-minded friends in the industry and collaborating with really interesting people, which is fun for me.
That's fascinating. I was going to say, because there's a colleague here at Munro that probably should be in on this podcast in the room. He's going to listen to this. Kevin's his name. He, when the most recent generation of the Mustang had come out, wanted to start making carbon fiber components for it, and sort of dabbled in that and made a custom hood, but had to find the people who could shape the clay and build the tools and do the vac infusion process and go through. And I remember him toting the tools around on his trailer and the different prototypes and trimming it and adjusting it and all those things. And I just got a glimpse of it from him doing it, but I remember how much consternation there was with that, and how it's in some ways felt like more of an art than a science for some of that, getting the geometry and the tooling.
It's a lot of both.
Yeah.
It's a lot of both. And I think, many people have said it, but Elon, for Tesla fans, has most notably said that prototypes are easy and production is hard. Yeah. And we were very good at making really beautiful, amazing carbon parts, but at no point in time were we ever good at producing it as a production business. It always just felt like one-off racing parts. And in fact, we did it again recently. Our Model 3 that we crashed at Pikes Peak and rebuilt into a center seater tube frame front end. The whole one-piece front cowl was actually made in-house by some of the same team that's still with us. So we still have that capability, but even in that case, we probably thought we were going to save a little money doing it ourselves. And I still, looking back, realized once again, we should just never make carbon parts in-house ever again. I'm pretty much of the mindset now where we will never do it. Doesn't matter how much someone wants to pay us to do it. We will never, ever do it again because we can't ever seem to be on budget and on timeline with it. It just is not possible.
I think that was the conclusion my friend ran into as well. But that's fascinating to hear about. And I'm glad you guys found the right partnerships and found a way to do it efficiently. That's super, super cool.
Thank
but
you.
Yeah, I was curious about how that went specifically with those carbon fiber parts. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's fun. I have a hard time separating hobby from business. Sometimes I do a lot of stuff that doesn't make business sense, but feels more like a hobby. And I still don't know where I land on that, but hopefully enough business sense to keep going for another 23 years.
Sure. So you kind of alluded to some of the racing there, which I know is just a huge and fun topic that I definitely wanted to get into with you. I know you mentioned the Pikes Peak hill climb. I think before I knew who you were, before we had a channel, it was I remember watching videos of, I think it would have been Randy. This would have been probably back in 2020, just hurtling up Pikes Peak, and you can hear like the air whooshing and the rocks pinging off the undercarriage. Yeah. And at every turn, it just looks like he's about to blast off into blue sky horizon, like a rocket ship or something. Just
such a bad idea.
Yeah. So tell me, was that like, I guess in terms of the different racing endeavors that you guys are involved in, because I think there's a lot of them, right? And maybe we can talk about that. But Pikes Peak seems to hold maybe a special place. Was that kind of the first big one that you guys were in, or where did that fall on the spectrum of dabbling and getting into the racing, and to the extent that you guys have?
Yeah. So the origins of racing, besides the fact that, we always thought it was cool, and going back to the start of my now career, I always liked it. And I started Bulletproof even before bringing over stuff from Japan. I was selling brake pads to guys at the racetrack because I just wanted to drive my car on track and I needed to cover the track day expenses.
Yeah.
I would, hand deliver brake pads to the guys at track. And that was even before I started bringing stuff in from Japan. Racing, I think, it's fun because we all have a competitive spirit. It's fun because we all love our cars and want to, advocate for how awesome they are. And what better way to benchmark how awesome the car is than to have a lap time that's really fast.
Sure.
So I like the journey, but also I'm very mindful of, how brands and experiences and cultures are built. And motorsports is a glue that holds a lot of things together. So when we started our mission of promoting Tesla as a car enthusiast brand, the on-track experience was a very important part of that, having lived through and experienced through the building of Japanese car culture in the US and what the importance of those track experiences to that community. So very early on, we created a series called Tesla Corsa, which was and is still, I believe, the only Tesla track day event where there's only Teslas on track.
Okay.
We started the first one of that, I don't even know, 6 years ago.
Okay.
Just finished one this weekend. We're probably at like 40 events now around the world, thankfully,
Wow.
as well. And again, one of these scenarios where it's a terrible business idea. Every event we lose money. So people ask how many we're going to do, and I'm like, I'm not sure I want
How
to
much money do I
optimize for
want to lose?
failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do enough. But I think those are really important things to do because ultimately Tesla makes amazing cars, and you really can't appreciate how great a car is on the street, or if you do, you're arguably a little bit unethical because you're endangering somebody in that scenario.
Sure.
The racetrack is a really good venue to be able to experience car ownership, and people have different misconceptions of what that means. Obviously, Pikes Peak is the extreme version where it's the most competitive, the most dangerous, the most irresponsible version of racing. Whereas Tesla Corsa, I have people, this last event in Atlanta, a couple drove down from Boston, multi-day trip to go out there on track. I believe their cars were totally stock. I want to say they're probably 60 or 70 years old. They are not your profile of a race car
No,
driver.
not at all. Yeah.
But they love the hell out of their Tesla, and it's fun to hang out with Tesla owners and drive fast and not have cops chasing you.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I think it's important to have that structure and that experience to appreciate the vehicles that people own and to do it in a safe way. So we do, instruction for beginners, driver coaching, the whole end-to-end thing. And from a business standpoint, we justify it saying there's a little bit of marketing in there because people eventually will want to go faster, and there's a limitation to what the factory components of Tesla can do. So
Sure.
if they want to buy our stuff, cool. If they want to buy someone else's stuff, that's cool too. So anyway, there's all levels of racing. We're involved in wheel-to-wheel racing. We've won multiple years in a row in Japan, wheel-to-wheel racing in the Model 3. Surprisingly enough, beating Porsche Taycan Turbo S in the Model 3 wheel-to-wheel racing is an unusual win. People would assume that Porsche is much faster. In this case, it wasn't.
Yeah.
That
one had to feel good.
We were nervous when we saw that competitor enter because I'm like, well, I don't know. This is going to be a bigger challenge for us.
Sure.
But it worked out well. We have a location at the Nürburgring, and we own a car out there that's on track multiple times a week. And that helps us a lot more for product development and validation.
Okay. Sure.
The Nürburgring is a very difficult facility to publish lap times. They're very restrictive of what you can say.
Sure.
So we don't really think of that venue as a place to have definable results. We think of it as a good place to learn, test stuff, break stuff, iterate, make better things. And we've had a lot of good products that have come out of that experience.
Sure.
And yeah, I think overall motorsports sharpens the blade in terms of engineering, in terms of building community, and also what's the point of doing all this awesome stuff in terms of product if you can't prove that it works? So we want to have lap records, our 4,900 pound Model S family sedan with stock power, stock battery, stock firmware, beat 56 out of 66 cars at Pikes Peak that were all race cars. There was not a car in our competition that was probably within 2,000 pounds weight of us. And you look at that platform and you think there's no way we're going to be that fast. And these are fun things. Like I come at all of this with the underdog mentality.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we have something to prove because that's where we came from. That's where Tesla came from. And I'm still not really caught up to speed with Tesla being, the most valued car manufacturer and being mainstream. In my mind, this is still a fight we're fighting to prove that this should be in conversation. So we always come from a bit of a chip on our shoulder to prove that this is what we're advocating for should be taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, setting lap records certainly gets you guys some serious street cred. So that's objectively probably the best way to go about it. And it is fascinating too. Like just there's obviously the cars like Pikes Peak. I was watching the dark helmet run and with the the stuff you were referencing here just recently, and yes, there's a lot on that car that's modified, but maybe what's equally impressive, as you alluded to, is the stuff on it that's not modified, right? The battery, the cooling specifically, some of the software. I mean, there's elements of that car. It's just wild when you think about, you know, friends who've spent tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars to try and build track cars to go fast in a straight line, and that, like, everyone I know who's ever built a car probably can't hold a candle to a bone stock Model X that you could go get, you know, haul your kids around and move a bunch of groceries in too. It's kind of, I remember when the first time I sat in a Tesla and gave it the beans, it was like, whoa, this is something pretty different. It just sort of, it changes what you think you know about how vehicles move and how throttles respond. And it was just, it is for people, I guess, and this is not specific necessarily just to Tesla. There's a lot of high-performing EVs out there, and certainly more are coming, and it's exciting to see more come. But for anyone who's, for whatever reason, dogmatically opposed to EVs, I'm always like, if they're a car person, it's like, just get in and drive one.
Just drive one. Yeah, that's
know?
that's all you need. Yeah. I mean, that was, I didn't share this earlier. I should have. When you were asking about how we decided to go all in on Tesla, you know, I had a meeting with our neighbors. They came by. And then very shortly after, without even test driving, I bought a P85 Plus.
Okay.
And I think it was within probably a day of driving it that I came in the office and said, everything we're doing going forward is we're betting on this 100%. This is the future. I'm sure of it. And it was really nothing more than just driving it one time.
Yeah.
Realizing, you know, the whole world I was in before was, how do you make a car more responsive, whether it's shifting speed or whether it's, you know, torque curve or something else. And
then you just go straight to instant.
The brain is hardwired to the car. Yeah, like, you know, I had just come out of, I think probably a day or so earlier prior to that, driving 1,000+ horsepower R35 GTR Nissan. And the road behavior of that car, if you want to do something, is got to drop down a couple gears, build up RPM, build up boost, and then go. And it was very clear to me that for enjoyment and use case, the instantaneous connection of car and driver with EV was game over. It wasn't like a maybe, it was a definite, and it was just a little bit of like, like a little bit of fear that like everything I was doing prior to that was wasting my life for a dead industry, and a lot of like excitement of like, how do I prove what I've learned to be true to other people and like make this thing as cool as I can make it.
Sure.
And you know, that was also part of the origin story. But as you're saying, like, it's not hard to understand that when you drive one.
Yeah, for sure. Now, would that have been the first EV that you had driven, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. And so you just went straight. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty neat. I remember.
It was just so obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember talking to a guy years back when we were first starting to look at Tesla stuff. And this guy drove a Nissan Leaf and was like really proud to drive an EV. And it was like, would have considered himself an early adopter. And I remember it was like, we were talking about some of the differences between the two cars, and he was getting a little offended. I'm like, man, this is a different animal, man. Like, I no disrespect to the Leaf, and obviously that was, I think it was the first obviously one of the first mass market EVs, but I think it was the first to sell 1 million units, the first BEV. I'll have to double check on that, but
I quite frankly didn't care at all about any of this stuff because it didn't ring to me as an enthusiast car.
Yeah.
So I bought Tesla shares because I believed in what Elon was doing, and I thought the company ethos was good, but I didn't think it applied to me as a car enthusiast until I drove one. And I think arguably that Model S 85 Plus and the Roadster before were really the only real true enthusiast EVs that existed. So if I did drive something before, I may have been, who knows, maybe negatively biased against it. I don't know.
Sure,
I was a blank slate, and then it was just super obvious that it was the right thing.
Yeah. I remember the first time I was in one and had a chance to get behind the wheel. It was a good friend of mine. I went to a school in Michigan and went to Kettering University. It's like a lot of automotive. Mechanical was my background. So like all my friends are in Metro Detroit and work in automotive. So this friend was at a supplier and had it as like a car that they were doing some development stuff on. And it was a Model S, and he probably shouldn't have let me, but he did let me hop behind the wheel. He's like, hey, I have this Tesla. This was probably 2013 or 14. He's like, come try it out. And it was pretty wild. I remember that specifically. Do you still have that first Tesla that you got? Is that in a garage somewhere, or did that one?
We had it for a long time. We ended up finally selling it about 3 years ago.
Okay.
But that was the P85 Plus is a great car.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, one other adjacent fact here: our one of our core drivers, Randy Popes, who's driven like literally every car on the planet. He's worked for Motor Trend for a lot of his career, and
Yeah.
most of the lap records he's driven. He didn't really have a ton of experience with Teslas when we met him, although
Okay.
he was. One interesting experience he did have was Tesla at one point tapped him to help give feedback to develop the initial track mode at Willow
Interesting.
Springs.
Okay.
But other than that, I managed to convince him to come out to one of our Tesla Corsa events, get behind the wheel of some cars, and then we kind of built this relationship. And what's interesting about this is about 6 months ago, he bought an old Model S as the daily driver. So I'd say that's kind of an interesting vote of confidence, and
Yeah.
also a little bit of these race experiences rubbing off, where he started to think, oh, I better drive one of these a little bit more because I like it.
Sure.
So he's got, I think, a 2013 or so Model S, and he's having a good time with that every day.
Very cool. In terms of, yeah, and obviously that connection with Randy's been super cool. He's quite a character. I've enjoyed watching some of the videos, the explanation.
He's the best, yeah.
I really like the in-car narrative when he's like narrating his own path up the peak. That's pretty neat. But
yeah, we love that.
So I imagine he's been a big part of some of your, like, the most proud racing accomplishments. I guess for Unplugged, what are some of the other like big notable things that you're proud of as a company or as your products have achieved? What big ones stick out to you?
We're all over. We've done a lot of stuff that
Sure.
has been great over the years. Man, it's hard to summarize.
Is there a favorite memory or two that stick out in your mind?
I think Pikes Peak is memorable for the pains and the successes. You know, we set the record for the fastest production-based EV ever this year, which is great. 2 years prior to that, we won our division against a bunch of cars that people probably thought we couldn't beat.
Sure.
Those are great, but I think equally great are just, whenever we do have public-facing collaborations with Tesla, it's fun. We were involved in a Tesla Veterans Model S, and this was years ago, but we had made this front fascia to kind of refresh the old Model S, and we were just really honored that Tesla would choose our parts to update their own Model S for Tesla vets and to help have community outreach there. I love Tesla, so whatever stories we have in public with Tesla are enjoyable because the relationships just so meaningful to me. We had a race car in the factory in Fremont with our documentary airing for about 3 or 4 months, and that was cool. But what was more cool was seeing the employees there taking selfies sitting inside the car, like loving it, because I could feel like we're adding back to the people who inspire us. I like
Sure.
this kind of full circle of we get inspired by Tesla. Whenever I feel like we're passing the inspiration back to them, it just gives me just really good vibes that like the work is meaningful.
Sure.
So I like all that stuff. We had our race car in Tesla showroom in Colorado and did some interviewing out there. That was fun to talk to Tesla staff and Tesla customers and showcase. Our car was right next to a stock Model S Plaid, and just illustrating that the DNA of the cars are almost identical.
Yeah.
And the only difference between a race car that sets lap records and a car that they're buying every day is, for the most part, just bolt-on parts.
Yeah.
Our brakes, our suspension, the things that we add are the same stuff that are on our website that we ship around the world. So anyone can pretty much, without even modifying power or changing anything on the car, can basically make their own race car pretty easily. I like sharing those comparisons because people think we're like so far removed from the stock car because it looks crazy, but it's all our catalog stuff. It's all bolt-on.
Well, and that to, like, yeah, I guess the uninitiated or untrained observer, like, that's what maybe is most crazy is, you think about for someone to like achieve similar results at Pikes Peak, to do it in a nice car, what they would have had to do to build that powertrain to get to what it could do. Like, it'd be.
You should see the cars we're racing against.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like, it's hilarious seeing them side by side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your point is very well taken if you actually visualize who we're racing against. It's crazy.
Yeah. But no, well, thank you for. I mean, I've grown a strange love for Volkswagens over the years, and there's this saying that's like Volkswagen turning everyday people into mechanics since 1918. Maybe you guys are turning everyday people into race car drivers since 2013. Maybe that should be the Unplugged mantra. But it's neat
that'd be a nice outcome. I like that.
Yeah, there you go. But it's I think one could make a strong argument that, with the example that you pointed out too of a couple coming down to a track day just because they love their car and want to do something with it safely. Like, I think it's probably you could make a strong argument that Tesla, in combination with some of what you guys are doing to augment them and extract more out of them, has made racing and motorsports more accessible to people who might have likely otherwise had zero interest or ability to get into it. And that's pretty neat.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the other kind of cool things, just top of mind, because I just came back from Atlanta, there's a private racetrack out there called Atlanta Motorsports Park. And one of our initiatives is we built for the racetrack a fully track tuned Model 3. And the reason we did that in collaboration with the track owner is that the car we built puts down the same lap times as a new Porsche 911 GT3 and is lower cost to maintain, lower cost to get in. And I think it's really important to showcase that and to get it in front of buyers who are not expecting it, for one, but also can see an opportunity to have more of a multi-use vehicle. You know, we're comparing against, you know, the fastest Porsche vehicles that, you know, barely have any storage or any usability or amenities with the car that's got, you know, 4 doors, 2 trunks, autopilot, all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
I love storytelling and creating content in ways that people just don't expect.
Sure.
And there's still a lot of opportunities for that. And I think Cybertruck is a big opportunity coming. I think the stuff we're doing with police fleets is a gigantic opportunity that gives me an entirely new mission, which
Sure.
is, you know, not only helping the environment, but saving taxpayer money. Because you know, just one very basic fact, which still blows my mind, is that any police car that's not an EV is spending about 60% of its time idling and putting emissions out there just to basically support the electronics on the vehicle and to keep the cabin cool enough where it's usable.
Yeah.
So we're just lighting taxpayer money on fire 60% of every day, every police car you see, and that to me just isn't right.
Yeah.
So there's so many great opportunities to do new things, and I've never felt like more excited just to, you know, advocate what the advantages of EVs are. Our point of view is very heavily Tesla biased, but I'd argue the same opportunity exists for every car manufacturer to really take EVs and push the limits.
Sure. Yeah, and if we want to touch on that just briefly, I know you guys have been like the upfitter for at least one fleet of police cars, right? Is that, or maybe it's more, I guess maybe you want to expound on that a little bit. So you guys have recently gotten into, I guess, outfitting Teslas for police applications then?
Yeah. So we got in the news a couple of months ago for the world's first 100% police fleet EV changeover all in one go.
Okay.
Prior to that, there's been like little dabblings in of, you know, a fleet, one here, one there, but it's a big leap of faith to replace an entire gasoline fleet with EVs. And we were involved in that, everything from the sales process, like going to city hall meetings and like, you know, advocating to get funding and like overcoming, you know, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of people in charge who are asking questions about, you know, what happens if Russia hacks your whole fleet and like cars are like turned into whatever. Like there's so many fear factor things that like we have to overcome. So we learned a lot on the sales side, on the procurement side with Tesla, on the engineering side with understanding the use case challenges. And we ended up, I think, hitting a sweet spot of, you know, approaching this the same way that we approached everything else, which is holistically, how do we make the best usability, reliability use case scenario for a Tesla and police fleet? And more importantly, how do we do that and have results so the next time it's sold, it's not so scary of a decision to make that choice?
Sure.
Because economically, by any standard, it saves a lot of money over the duration of the car. Like that's pretty easy to understand, but there's still always going to be some fear about whatever excuse they want to have, whether it's charging infrastructure concerns or, you know, the crazy comments you see online of, oh, in a police chase, what happens when a Tesla just runs out of battery and the criminal gets away, or
those 300 plus mile chases.
Nonsense. Yeah. I mean, like, I know it's nonsense, but we have to just like, you know, lead by example and show that this is real and it works. And then it goes from the same idea back in 2013, you know, advocating that driving a Tesla can be fun and enjoyable for someone who didn't give it a shot. Now we got to do the same thing, you know, having police fleets with Teslas. People have reasons to believe that's not true or not good. I know for a fact it is. So we got to just do it, prove it, and then that becomes the new standard.
Awesome. So that fleet, how many vehicles then did you guys equip it with?
So we just announced the deal, I don't even know, 3-4 months ago. We're in the middle of it. That's a smaller fleet. It's 20 cars.
Okay, still, that's a good chunk of cars.
it takes a lot more engineering than I expected to get
Okay.
it dialed in. Much like the aftermarket, how I was saying the pros and cons are that there's no standards, anyone could do anything. Police fleet upfitting, there's not really any standards, anyone can do pretty much anything.
Okay.
So there's, I think, a lot of opportunities to make the vehicles more reliable, safer for officers from a ballistic standpoint. We're working on ballistic protection options,
Oh, wow. Cool.
also from like a electrical standpoint. You know, where our engineering right now ranges from ballistic stuff to harnesses and electronics to lighting components to uh, uh, everything in between. Push bars, pit maneuver type stuff, everything in between. We're kind of re-envisioning what we think right a good solution is. And one of the fun things about being a manufacturer is you can make anything better.
Sure.
There's no rules. As long as you can find an opportunity to make something better, you can do it. So my mind has been lately on ballistic door protection because ballistic doors are laughably bad right now.
Yeah, people just weld in thick steel plates historically, right?
Well, yeah, you look at a Tesla. We installed one. It adds so much weight that when you close the door, the car shakes for like 20 seconds. In officer use cases, they're usually not on flat ground. So if they're ducking behind that door on a hill, that thing's crushing them because it's really heavy. And also the Tesla doors, the windows are frameless, and I guarantee you that door sags
Yeah,
over time, and that
sure.
window starts contacting and things break. Anyway, as an example of how aftermarket should work, and I think does work in most cases, you can identify opportunities everywhere, whether
Sure.
it's a brake pad compound, whether it's a ballistic door, whether it's aerodynamic opportunities. Everything's fair game in our world, and that's fun.
Sure. Now, on the topic of new use cases, I know I'm curious. So we talked a bit about racing, and I know obviously on your guys' site there's a section for Cybertruck. It's a different vehicle than other vehicles they've had out. Are we going to see like a Unplugged Performance Cybertruck at the Dakar Rally or something in the near future? What sort of racing applications might you guys be considering for Cybertruck?
I'd love to do that. Yeah, sky's the limit with Cybertruck. There's so much that can be done. Our initial focus is rethinking the Cybertruck the same way that we rethink any vehicle, which is starting foundationally what's the DNA of it and making it more of that. So DNA of Cybertruck is not a race truck. So our initial focus is not about racing, although the platform will be very capable for racing, and we'll have a lot of crossover on the stuff we're doing with motorsports, because ultimately anything that is more ruggedized, more adjustable, specialized for different use cases will transfer into racing anyways. But our general ethos for Cybertruck is, if you had to be in one vehicle, in an apocalypse or like end of the world or on Mars or somewhere else, like this is like the most badass, indestructible thing you'd want to be in.
Sure.
And it ends up being just like a Swiss Army knife of you can do anything and you can do it in the most ruggedized way possible. So our ethos is more of that, please.
Okay.
So we're gonna do more of that.
Super neat. Well, I'm sure you guys will acquire your own and rapidly disassemble them to figure everything out. That's our same thing too. I can promise you, as soon as we can get our hands on a Cybertruck, we'll be tearing it apart and putting it on the channel and everything. So if there's ever anything we can do in terms of giving you an advanced look, I'm sure you're probably like, I think I have a reservation in for a Cybertruck. I'm like 17,000th in line or something, so not very early, but hopefully.
Everyone's pretty eager.
Yeah.
I think it'll be worth the wait, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, hey, man, this has been super fun. I think I want to be respectful of your time and make sure we kind of don't run on for forever here. But maybe we could end with one last kind of big question or thought. I guess there are some people, and you alluded to it earlier, I've heard people say that EVs are like the death of car culture. They're going to steal the spirit of cars as we've known them. And I would imagine that comment, you have a different opinion there. I guess if someone came up to you and said that, they said that, EVs aren't good for car culture, what would your message to them be?
Yeah, that was the driving focus when we started. It was very simply, we drove the car, we knew it was the future, and the question was, is this the death of car culture or the beginning of a new chapter?
Mm-hmm.
And every action we've done for the past 10 years has been to show that it's the beginning of a new chapter. And I think what we've seen is quite the opposite, which is that most standards people judge car culture. It's hard to be competitive if you're not an EV. We have in multiple cases with our Model S, the overall lap record of any car. We're not competing against EVs. We're competing against everything.
Sure.
So I think from an enthusiast standpoint, we're reaching a point where the fastest cars, definably fastest cars, have to be EV or at least hybrid. But in the future, 100% EV, not hybrid. I think from a community standpoint, we see these car shows, gatherings are getting bigger and bigger. People are enjoying different ways to customize their cars. And there's more of a duality of use. It used to be that if you modified a car, you made it worse of a daily driver, and then you had to get a second daily driver to have your modified car in the garage for the weekends.
Sure.
The Tesla as a platform doesn't piss off your neighbors during cold starts in the mornings and the weekends. It's you can enjoy your audio system because it's not making a bunch of noise all the time. For normal gasoline powered cars, not normal, but for ICE cars, you'd have, valved exhaust systems where you can kind of have a little bit of peace and quiet, but not too much. Tesla is just good at everything. So there's not really a downside. The only argument that can be made is there will be some nostalgia for analog. And I think that's totally okay. I think ultimately, a lot of car enthusiasts' future garages will be a Tesla for every day and an old lightweight analog car that has no electronics just to counterbalance that for weekends. Because driving a Tesla, if anything, it makes you appreciate imperfect, inefficient things because the Tesla is so efficient and so perfect that you almost sometimes want to experience the noise and the rattle and like the long throw shifts and all the quirks of clutches and all these things just because that's also an experience. But that's horseback riding, right? Like this is where we're at is, we've made a cultural leap.
Yeah, I know. And I was like, for the same reason people have record players or any other old nostalgic thing, we'll blow the dust off the stick shift and, show your kids how to drive it someday. It'll be the relic.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally respect that. But I think anyone who loves cars and loves driving every day, if they haven't already realized that driving an EV checks so many more boxes than they thought was possible, I think those days are coming for everyone. And it's not like you have to, it's you'll want to once you realize how good it is.
Sure. Excellent. Well, I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on here. But Ben, this has been super informative, super fun. You're an awesome guy to talk to, and you're awesome for making the time to be on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's
Any
really
last
an honor
thoughts?
and pleasure. Come to LA. Let's grab a beer sometime. I love these conversations.
Absolutely, man. And the offer stands. If you're ever in Metro Detroit, stop by. We've got all kinds of things torn down. Would love to hang out with you.
Sounds good.
Awesome, Ben. Appreciate it.